If you are an FPS gamer looking for the best value on the market, then this is it. The Rainbow 2 SE has 4 extra remappable buttons, a robust software suite, extreme accuracy, and a whole bunch of other features that you need to take a look at. There's a full pros and cons at the end. Otherwise, let's stick around, hang out, and take a look at this controller. Alright, so jumping into the aesthetics of this controller, this one specifically, since it's that lime green colorway, definitely looks like that Fisher-Price kids controller. Can't say that I'm the biggest fan of this colorway, especially with these face buttons, but it is what it is. This was the color that was available at the time that I purchased it. Purchased it for about 45 bucks Canadian, and yeah, that's kind of insane value. I would definitely pick it up at that price point. There's also a pink and a blue colorway. I think the blue one looks the best, but yeah, not that much of a difference either way. Just where you see this lime green, just picture blue or pink. There is a Pro version as well, so the Pro version looks pretty different. It's got like a semi-transparent black faceplate. That one looks pretty sick. It's got some RGB as well, and it also comes with a charging dock, and I believe there's a headphone jack down here as well. Yeah, I am perfectly fine with missing out on all of those things because this has the best value. I don't need a charging dock. I run it wired, and aesthetics, while it does look much better, I mean, I'm holding this in my hands, not the biggest deal. It doesn't really offer any sort of competitive advantage. And I've also heard that apparently these thumbsticks are the slightest bit more accurate. I'm not sure if that's been patched by software, if that's even possible, but yeah, I think just overall, this is the one to get. It's got an insane value for the price point. Did want to mention, if you like this kind of content, please consider liking and subbing to the channel. This is a pretty new channel, as you can see, and would appreciate your support a lot. I want to do some more controller content. That's what I like to do. Did the 8-bit Duo review previously, doing this one now, and plan on doing a video on why these two controllers are kind of the best pairing in gaming. One for FPS, one for everything else. I think that would be a really interesting video. They've got a lot of similarities, obviously a lot of differences. That's why I'm running both. But either way, if you like this kind of content, let me know, leave a comment, and let's get into it. So let's take a look at the spec sheet real quick. So yeah, to start off, the way you connect is you have this 2.4 gigahertz dongle, so you can use it wirelessly like that, or you can use it wired at 1000 hertz polling rate, that's what I run. I think it's just an FPS controller. You might as well go for the least amount of latency on the controller. There's also Bluetooth, but yeah, I don't use that whatsoever. This thing also has gyro. Personally, I don't use any gyro, but again, at this price point, it's really great to see that that's an available feature on this. It's also got 4 customizable buttons. So you've got the 2 extra bumpers here, then you've got the 2 extra back buttons there. It's got 12-bit joysticks. So before everybody gets up in arms about the fact that this uses potentiometers and not Hall effect, right now, potentiometers are the most accurate thumbsticks on the market, and BigBigWon does a really great job at tuning these, so they feel really, really precise. So yeah, that's why this is an FPS controller. If I was running this as my everyday controller, putting the most amount of stick times in this, then yeah, I might be a little bit disappointed if this gets stick drift early. Again, potentiometers, they will get stick drift at some point, so that's why I'm only using this for FPS. But yeah, this is what you want for the most accurate. Speaking of software, BigBigWon does a really great job providing a really robust software suite, so I'll give a full tour of that later. But yeah, you can customize everything about this, dead zones, response curves, whatever you want to do. So that's another reason why this is a good controller for FPS. And then in the package itself, it actually comes with a pretty nice set of extra thumbsticks and an extra D-pad. So yeah, why don't we just take a quick look at that. So thumbsticks come with a couple different heights. What I like to run is I like to run the normal joystick on the left and then the medium one on the right. I think that the rubber on these is great. More on that later, but yeah, let's just do a quick swap of the D-pad. So all you have to do is pop it out like that. So as you can see, there is a little notch on the top over here. You line that up with the notch over here. Same thing with this disc-shaped D-pad. So yeah, you can just put that in there, snap it in. And then these are held in with these little clips over there. So this is the medium one, like I mentioned. So take a look at the tall one, like that. And there's a regular one, like that. That's what I run on the left thumbstick. But yeah, let's throw the tall one on here. So it's really great that this isn't kind of like locked beneath a Pro controller sort of thing, the Pro version of this controller. So even though you're getting the SE, you do get all these extra little goodies. So one thing I like to do is go relatively in depth on how this actually feels to hold it in the hand. So I like to go through all the materials, buttons, so on and so forth. All right, so the aesthetics to start with. One thing to mention is I actually did rub off this design that was originally printed on the controller. I didn't really like it. It makes it look even more like a toy than it already does. It kind of looks like that Fisher-Price controller for kids, and yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. They definitely fumbled the bag a little bit. Too many chefs in the kitchen, I don't know. Very strange design choice, but you know, it is what it is. You hold it in your hands, you're not going to be looking at it the whole time. I think that's also compounded by these face buttons that each have a different color. I think that looks pretty tacky. I think if they made them all the same color, textured, literally anything other than this, that would have been better, but it is what it is. All right, so yeah, faceplate, just that flat white. If you go around back, again, it's got the white, but it's got these rubber grips. I think these rubber grips are kind of the best I've used on a controller. They feel really, really good. Very similar texture to what they used on these thumbstick caps. Definitely cooking with the same stuff that they cooked up the Elite Series 2 with. Those grips are great. I think it's one of the few things that the Elite Series 2 does well. I wish they did extend those grips over to the front. I really don't know why they didn't do it all the way. Kind of seems like a half measure. Strange design choice not to make it go all the way on front. BigBigWon did actually put out the Blitz 2 recently. I think that extends to the front. So yeah, not really sure why they didn't put it on the front. They might as well have gone all the way, but either way, it is what it is. Okay, so let's get into these face buttons. There's definitely the legend printed on top a little bit. You're obviously not going to see it. It doesn't look like they're fading anytime soon, but yeah, it's definitely printed on top of the button. I do know in some other reviews, people mention that they kind of, the B button specifically, pushes too far into the controller more than the other buttons. I haven't noticed that on my unit. Maybe it goes in like 0.5 millimeter more, but it's not something you're ever really going to notice. It feels good. They feel basically like stock Xbox membrane face buttons. Feel about the same. Maybe the slightest bit stiffer, but either way, they feel pretty good. Very little wobble. Pretty nice to use. The thumbsticks are very, very smooth, so they've got these really great anti-friction rings. They also have this metal shaft along the thumbsticks, so it's very, very smooth gliding. The rubber on these is very nice. It's kind of soft and textured. I think it's the best stock rubber I've ever used on a thumbstick. So good that I don't actually feel the need to run Control Freaks or the Skull and Co's. I think the Skull and Co's are kind of the standard for how good a thumbstick can feel. I don't feel the need, and I don't really want to use them on these because they feel so good. So definitely recommend the rubber on these. They feel really good. The D-pad, honestly, it's pretty mid. It feels kind of shallow. It's kind of clicky. You're not using it as your main input on an FPS anyways, so it's not really the biggest deal. You just want to be able to hit all the directions consistently. I feel like I can do that with this thing. There is that other dome style D-pad. I'm not the biggest fan of it. It kind of doesn't sit as flush with the controller. And again, if I'm hitting just this 4 direction input here, I just want to be able to reliably hit all of those 4 directions. So yeah, D-pad, kind of one of the weak points of the controller. Not the biggest fan. Moving over to the bumpers, there is the texture in this area over here, which I feel doesn't make the most sense because I think most people would end up hitting it there. That's at least where I hit it. So there's no stippling on this side of the bumpers, which is kind of unfortunate. In terms of the actual shape and feel, you can kind of hit them at any angle. These feel basically one-to-one with Xbox Series bumpers. But yeah, I wish they had the stippling over here. The Vader line does the stippling there, and it feels really, really good. Definitely feels locked in. Bit of a nitpick, but you know what? I wish they had it. On the triggers, there is that kind of stippling over here. This feels really good. They do feel the slightest bit pointier on the triggers. So the way I hold the controller is like this, one on the bumper, one on the triggers, and I can definitely feel the bump a little bit more. I can't remember if this is the exact same as the standard series controller. It's been a while since I used one. Feels pretty similar, but yeah, maybe combined with the resistance curve of this and the trigger stop, I notice it a little bit more. So speaking of trigger stops, this is an on and off trigger stop like this. Cuts out about 70%, so you can see like that. Let's get a side by side. So that's the full, partial, then comparing it to a mechanical one. You can see there's a lot more travel. I think this cuts out about 70% of the travel. I definitely wish it cut out more, and they're not clicky. So personally, I do like the feel of the clicky more, but when it comes to these Hall effect triggers, it's actually more accurate to have them as Hall effect, because in a Hall effect trigger, it's going to start registering the input of the trigger as soon as it detects movement. So it's going to be very, very low latency, and it's going to be much better, which for FPS, obviously you're going to want to hit it. If you slide jump on someone turning a corner, you want to be hitting that trigger as soon as possible, as opposed to something like this with the mechanical switch. Not only do you have to do that little bit of travel to hit the switch, but there is going to be some sort of input delay from registering that switch. So you're not really registering movement from the trigger movement, you're registering movement from a switch, the same way a face button registers an input from a switch. So you're actually getting the lowest amount of latency on something like this that's a Hall effect trigger. So yeah, when it comes to FPS, this is definitely the way to go for the least amount of latency. When it comes to the actual feel, I definitely prefer a clicky switch, but personal preference, I would kind of take the L and go for a clicky switch just because it feels so much better. But yeah, if we're talking about optimal response time, this is the way to go. And then as you can see, there's also these extra bumpers. To me, they're in the perfect position. They feel really, really good. It only took me about a day or so to get used to them, coming from someone who hadn't used them previously. But now that I've got a couple months on this controller, I can't really go back. Comparing it to something like the 8-bit do, they also have these bumpers, which I think feel good, but they're completely in different spots. Either way, both of them feel amazing. So I think that just goes to show how useful these are. They definitely use a tack switch the same way that these bumpers do. They feel pretty good. And then moving around to the back, we've got these two perfectly placed back buttons, at least for me. They are mechanical, so they're super great. They're super spammable. They sit right in where your finger would. They feel really ergonomic and natural. So yeah, I hold the controller like this, like that. Feels really, really good, really solid, really responsive. Yeah, after using these mechanical back buttons, I've seen a teardown. They definitely do use mouse click switches as opposed to these that just use standard tack switch. The mechanical back button, I can't go back. They feel so good, so spammable. Around the front, you've got a few buttons here. These just feel like your standard kind of Xbox Series buttons. You got your home button over here, you've got your start, you've got your select, and you've got your screenshot button. And then over here, you've got this extra chin of controls. I thought it was gonna get in the way, but maybe with just my sized hands, kind of like smaller to average size hands, I actually don't notice this at all. I'm not making contact with this chin whatsoever. It's barely even noticeable. Personally, I wish it wasn't there because I use the software to control all of this stuff. I don't do anything on board the controller. That's just my personal use case. If you're switching between devices or you're on the go, I definitely see why people like these, and this is a huge plus to have it here. But as someone who doesn't really use it, I mean, it's fine, it doesn't get in the way, it just looks kind of strange. So moving down these buttons over here, you've got the function key over here, you've got the configuration key here, which lets you swap profiles, you've got the macro button over here, you've got the mapping key here, and then you have the turbo key here. Let's do a quick sound test on the parts of this controller so you guys know what it sounds like. So all right, so let's compare this to the standard Xbox Series X controller. So you can see here, the shape is basically identical. I'll point out some of the key differences. So on the handles over here, this is a little bit sharper. You're not gonna really notice it during gameplay because you don't really contact it. But yeah, one thing to know is a little bit sharper. You can see tapers in the slightest bit. I think they have basically identical bumpers, however. The triggers are extremely similar and everything else is also extremely similar. So in the hand, you're not really going to feel that much of a difference. If you've held a Series X controller, you've basically held this one. Obviously, the chin is a little bit different, but yeah, with my size hands, I actually don't notice a difference in the feel of these whatsoever. It does not get in the way. You can see my hands don't go anywhere near it. Closest is at the back, but even then, you don't really feel it at all. This feels about the same, but I will say that this definitely feels a lot lighter. This is a very, very light controller, and it doesn't seem to sacrifice in any way, shape, or form. It has a lot more going on with a standard series controller, and it is almost feels like it's half the weight. Very, very light controller. It feels really good. With a lot of other Pro controllers, I actually end up opening them up and taking the rumbles out just so I can have them be as light as possible, but definitely do not feel the need with this. It already comes in pretty light, but yeah, if you want it to be lighter, you could just take the rumbles out. All right, so let's take a look at Gamepad Tester. So in this profile that I have on the controller right now, there is no dead zone. So we're gonna see what the no dead zone actually looks like. So let's take a look. If you scroll down here, you see it's not a perfect resting value. So if I even touch it a little bit, it's gonna move. So that is just some of the, let's call it slop of the controller. So nothing is ever gonna recenter perfectly to a perfect resting value. If it does, it means there is some sort of dead zone. So in terms of an FPS controller, you definitely want there to be a little bit of wiggle no matter where you put it, because that means there is no dead zone. It is as accurate as possible. So you can see as I flick the sticks, it's never going to go to the exact same point. There is some dynamic recentering going on, so it will try and put it pretty close to a recentering point sometimes, or at least that's how I understand it. But yeah, you can see it's never returning to the exact same spot. This is that no dead zone mode. And yeah, just something to know, by default, the second profile out the box on this controller is going to be a no dead zone profile. You can change that later. You can change any other profile to have no dead zone, but that's just how they have it configured out the box. So let's take a look at a quick circularity test. Again, this isn't the biggest, most groundbreaking test. You can tweak so much of this controller, it almost doesn't really matter all that much. I think they feel great. The circularity test was pretty good. These are potentiometers, and that's a pretty low number for potentiometer, especially running in that raw mode. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Gamepad Tester. Again, zero dead zone, totally possible in any and all profiles here. All right, now we're gonna take a look at the BigBigWon app. So I don't know if they fixed it, but when I had to download it, it was kind of sketchy. Said it was gonna give my computer a virus, but you know what, it didn't, and it's actually a great piece of software. Some kind of confusing tooltips, but either way, let's get into it. So yeah, I've got my profile here, I just called Apex, but just to show you all the features, I'm just gonna make a new profile and we can run through what you can do here together. So first thing you're gonna see is that you can configure gyro. I don't use that. You've got the sticks. So one tab for left stick, one tab for right stick. On the left stick, you can see that the default dead zone is 12. You can change that however you want. Like I said, I changed that to 2. Joystick circles, so that's going to be that outer dead zone. You can change the curve. I don't touch any of this. And then you've got the rectangular dead zone, so that changes it from basically a circle to rectangular. Rectangular is that raw mode. Drift dynamic, DFL dynamic filter. Honestly, not too sure what this does. I don't use it because I think it adds a little bit of latency, but yeah, I've never really triple checked that. Dynamic calibration just means if it starts to drift, it's going to recalculate the center point. I use this because it feels good. I would definitely recommend either looking into these settings or just playing around with them and see what you like best, whatever feels the best for you. So yeah, you can do that with left stick or right stick. The triggers, again, these are these default values that it gives you whenever you start a new profile, but yeah, you can just calculate or add dead zones or remove dead zones for the triggers. You can turn on this hair trigger mode. I like to be super precise and just do this myself. Key maps, so you can add key maps for every single button. One thing that's really cool is you can do it for keyboard as well. I'm not sure if this works if you're not connected to this software. Again, personally, I've only ever used this with the software. I have this just running on my main PC. Shake is a real fun name for vibration. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, you can just turn on the shake strength, right grip and left grip. That's what you can do with that. This is for macros. I don't use those. These are the settings that are universal to the controller. So if this was the configuration tab for profile, let's just hit save and just call it test. Sure. But these settings over here are for the controller no matter what profile you're on. So you can switch between X input and switch. This step precision settings. So in this case, lower is better. Same methodology as before. Definitely try them all out. See which one you like best. But this is the basically gap between registering inputs. So the smaller the gap is, the more times it's going to register input between this position and the outer position. So 256 means it's going to be taking bigger jumps, 32 smaller. I keep it at 64, feels pretty good to me. Rate of return, that's polling rate. Again, polling rate and input delay are very different things. So polling rate is just how many times your controller is connecting with the computer. So it'll be connecting every single millisecond. But the input delay of the buttons does not change. So if the input from the A button takes 5 milliseconds to get to the computer, it's going to always take 5 milliseconds. Whether if you're on 1000 hertz or something that's lower than that, 500 hertz, it's always going to take that time. We'll get more into that later. But again, just because it has 1000 hertz polling rate does not mean it's going to give you 1 millisecond input delay. Very different. Calibration, you got to calibrate every time you make the updates. Very simple calibration process. Left stick maps D-pad. Yeah, turns the left stick into a D-pad. Never looked into what these do, but yeah, you can change that if you want. And then there's a product manual. All right, the last thing here is the upgrade. I've already upgraded to the latest software, but yeah, basically you plug it in, you upgrade, and then you calibrate. Super simple calibration and update process. All right, so I've got Gamepad open, and we're just going to take a look at the polling rate. All right, so you can see, yeah, it hits 1 millisecond. There's some maximum latency there, but yeah, basically what you would expect. All right, this is going to be the stick analyzer test with no dead zones on the right stick. All right, that's basically as good as it gets. All right, now we're going to take a look at the joystick tester. So as you can see here, we're about 950 hertz polling rate, so just below that 1K hertz polling rate. You can see that there's no dead zone, so every time I literally touch the stick, it's going to register some sort of input. So it's got that joystick wobble, which is exactly what you want to be seeing. So you can see there's no dead zone. It's picking up every single movement. Feels really responsive, really accurate, and yeah, that's pretty much it for the joystick tester. All right, so starting to wrap up, let's take a look at some of the cons of the controller. I mentioned all of them briefly before, but yeah, this D-pad isn't the best. Some people might find it fine. I find it fine. You're basically just using it as 4 buttons for an FPS, so not the biggest deal. It's not a primary input or anything. I also wish they extended the grip to the front of the controller. Like I said before, one of the biggest pros is actually the grip. I really wish they put it on the front of the controller to just kind of round it out. I also wish that these trigger stops were different in a couple ways. So I wish the trigger stop actually cut out a little bit more slop, so maybe something closer to 90-95% when they're locked, as opposed to 70, which it does now. Personally, I also wish they were mechanical. I know that adds a little bit of latency, but I think those just feel so good and so satisfying. I would be willing to take the L on that and yeah, just have them feel a little bit better. I also wish a couple more things were mechanical. So I wish these bumpers were mechanical, and I wish these extra bumpers here were mechanical. The buttons on the back are mechanical and they feel so good and so spammable. I wish they carried that through. The face buttons are membrane. I prefer to have a membrane face button over a mushy mechanical button like they have on the Vader 3. I'm not the biggest fan of that, as well as on the T4K. Yeah, I've yet to feel a really great implementation of clicky switch, and I think I'd rather stick with membrane. Maybe that's already on the market, maybe it's coming soon, but either way, those are the things that I would change about this controller. In regards to the things that I do like about this controller, and I think this does well, again, I think this is kind of the best value for FPS gaming, especially if you can get it on sale around that $45-50 price range. Yeah, it just feels really good. The sticks are super smooth. The rubber on these is some of the best in the game, same with the rubber on the back. The extra bumpers are really good. The back buttons are really great. They're so great that I actually wish there were 2 more. That way I could hold the controller like this, and I could have fingers on each button. Don't need to use the face buttons. I already don't need to use the face buttons because there's 4 extra, but having 2 more would be great. Maybe take away some of the D-pad usage. That would be fantastic. But yeah, in addition to that, the software suite is fantastic. You can control literally everything about the controller, so much so that I don't need to use this bottom area over here. I don't use it very much. It's got the 1000 hertz polling rate, which is great. It's also got relatively low input delay. So yeah, input delay and polling rate, different things. And the input delay is pretty solid on this. They're really high resolution joysticks. They feel really good, super smooth, and yeah, it's got a lot of step accuracy, things that you can change. Again, you can really tune this to be the ultimate FPS weapon, make it do whatever you want it to do, make it fit your preference. It's definitely worth playing around with the software suite and playing around with what settings suit your needs the best. Definitely took a little bit of trial and error, but once you dial it in, there's not really much better. I think for the BigBigWon Rainbow 3, if they fix a bunch of the stuff that I had mentioned, implement some mechanical buttons, 2 more on the back, and triggers and bumpers, and yeah, just really flesh this controller out, I think it's going to be a pretty unbeatable combo, as long as the price range isn't too high. But either way, they just released the Blitz 2, and it did fix some of these issues, but yeah, it still retains some of the same issues that I mentioned, like only 2 back buttons, and it doesn't have trigger stops. It's just got 1 set of trigger length being mechanical, which is fine for an FPS controller. But either way, it's really great to see that BigBigWon have made such a compelling controller at this price point. I think it's great for FPS. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for this one. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you've tried this out. If I missed anything, I'm happy to do some more content on this controller. Probably going to do a head-to-head sooner or later about these controllers and why it's kind of the best combo in gaming. But yeah, appreciate you taking the time to watch this, and see ya.